I never told my grandson Ryan about my monthly income of $85,000. Not once in all the years I raised him after his parents died. He grew up watching me clip coupons at the kitchen table of my modest two-bedroom apartment, seeing me drive my 2008 Honda Civic with the faded paint, hearing me say, "We don't need that," when he wanted the expensive sneakers his friends wore. He thought I was barely scraping by on Social Security and a small pension, and I never corrected him. I had my reasons. Good ones, I thought. I'd seen what money did to people, how it twisted relationships, bred entitlement, created distance between those who had it and those who didn't. After I lost my daughter and son-in-law in that car accident when Ryan was 7, I made a choice. I would raise him to understand the value of hard work, humility, and character. The 23 properties I owned across 3 states, the real estate portfolio I'd built over 40 years of strategic investing, those were my business. My wealth wasn't a secret weapon. It was simply irrelevant to who Ryan needed to become. Now, at 28, Ryan was a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm. He'd earned every promotion through long hours and dedication. He lived in a decent apartment in downtown Seattle, drove a reliable used car, and was finally ready to propose to Madison, his girlfriend of 2 years. When he called to tell me about the engagement, his voice cracked with emotion. "Gran, I wish Mom and Dad could see this, but having you there means everything." "I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart," I said, my heart swelling with pride. "There's just one thing," he hesitated. "Madison's family wants to meet you first, before the engagement party. They're pretty traditional about these things." "Traditional?" I asked, sensing something beneath his words. "They want to host a dinner. At the Emerald Room. It's this restaurant where—" "I know where it is, Ryan. I'd been to the Emerald Room exactly twice in my life, both times for business meetings I couldn't avoid. It was the kind of place where a single glass of wine cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. I told them we could go somewhere simpler, but Madison's father insisted. He said it's important for families to meet on, quote, proper footing, whatever that means." I heard the apology in his voice. Ryan had always been protective of me, worried that I couldn't afford things, that life was too expensive for my fixed income. It broke my heart and made me proud in equal measure. "It's fine, honey. I'll be there." "When is it?" "Next Saturday, 7 o'clock. "And Gran? Please don't worry about. Just wear whatever you're comfortable in. Madison knows you're not. She knows our situation is different from hers." Our situation. Different. The words hung in the air after we said goodbye. I stood in my small apartment, looking around at the space I deliberately kept simple. The furniture was comfortable but old. The kitchen had appliances from a decade ago that still worked perfectly fine. The only extravagance I allowed myself was books, hundreds of them, crammed into every available shelf. This place had been my choice, my refuge, my statement that you didn't need marble countertops to have a rich life. But now I wondered if I'd been fair. Had I prepared Ryan for this? For a future where his wife's family had expectations, where wealth would be displayed and measured and judged. That's when I decided. I would go to this dinner, but I would go as myself, the version of myself Ryan knew. I would see how Madison's family treated someone they perceived as beneath them financially. Because if they couldn't show basic respect to Ryan's grandmother, the woman who raised him, then my grandson needed to see that before he tied his life to theirs. I wasn't setting a trap. I was observing. There's a difference. The week passed quickly. I prepared carefully, but not in the way most people would. I chose my outfit thoughtfully, a simple navy dress I'd bought at Nordstrom Rack 3 years ago, still in excellent condition, a single strand of pearls my own mother had given me, low heels that were comfortable enough to walk in. I looked neat, modest, dignified, like a grandmother on a fixed budget who'd made an effort. Saturday evening arrived with unusual rain for Seattle in October. I took the bus to within 2 blocks of the Emerald Room, then walked the rest of the way, my umbrella barely keeping the drizzle off my dress. By the time I reached the restaurant's elegant entrance, my shoes were damp, and I could feel my carefully styled silver hair beginning to frizz in the humidity. The doorman looked at me with barely concealed assessment. His eyes traveled from my damp shoes to my discount store dress, and I saw the flicker of doubt cross his face. Was I lost? Was I looking for someone who worked here? "I have a reservation," I said calmly. Under Garrett, 7 o'clock. Of course. His professional mask snapped back into place, but the damage was done. I'd seen that look before, though rarely directed at me, the look that said, "You don't belong here." Inside, the restaurant was exactly as I remembered. Soft lighting, cream-colored tablecloths, the subtle clink of expensive silverware on fine china. A hostess in a sleek black dress approached, and I watched her perform the same quick evaluation the doorman had. "Mrs. Garrett?" she confirmed, though her tone suggested she was double-checking if I was at the right place. "Yes. Right this way." She led me through the main dining room, past tables where Seattle's elite savored $100 steaks and $50 sides. I caught a few glances, noted the subtle surprise when people saw my outfit, but I kept my head high, my steps even. I'd spent 4 decades in boardrooms. I knew how to carry myself. The Garrett party was seated at a large corner table with a view of the Seattle skyline. Ryan spotted me first and immediately stood, his face lighting up with that beautiful smile that still reminded me of my daughter. "Gran!" He came around the table to hug me, his embrace warm and genuine. "You made it." Of course I did. I squeezed him back, then let him guide me to the table. Madison stood next, elegant in what I recognized as a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was beautiful. I'd always thought so, with honey blonde hair and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. "Mrs. Garrett, it's so lovely to see you again." Madison kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and subtle. But there was something in her eyes, a slight tightening around her smile, that told me she'd noticed my outfit, noticed the difference between us. Then came her parents. Richard Garrett, no relation, despite the shared surname, was a man in his late 50s who wore success like a well-tailored suit. Everything about him projected wealth. The Rolex, the perfectly cut hair with distinguished gray at the temples, the way he stood as if he owned not just the table but the entire room. "Helen, is it?" He extended his hand, his grip firm but brief. "Richard Garrett. And this is my wife, Patricia." Patricia Garrett was a woman who'd clearly spent a fortune, maintaining the appearance of not having spent a fortune. Her skin was too smooth for 60, her figure too perfect, her jewelry too understated to be anything but extremely expensive. She smiled at me, but her eyes performed a full inventory. Discount dress, modest jewelry, damp shoes, slightly frizzy hair. "How nice to finally meet you," Patricia said, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy women use when they're being polite to service workers. "Please, sit." I took my seat between Ryan and Madison. Across from me sat Richard and Patricia, with Madison's younger brother, Tyler. At the end, a 24-year-old who'd apparently inherited his father's sense of superiority along with his trust fund. "So," Richard began, "once we were all settled, Ryan's told us a bit about you, Helen. You raised him after the accident?" "Yes. Ryan was 7 when he came to live with me. That must have been difficult. Financially, I mean." Patricia's concern seemed genuine on the surface, but underneath I heard the calculation. She was establishing the baseline. Poor grandmother, limited means. "We managed," I said simply. "I'm sure you did your best," Patricia continued. "It couldn't have been easy on a fixed income. Social Security these days is just—" She made a dismissive gesture. "Well, it's criminal how little they give seniors." Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Gran did an amazing job. I had everything I needed." Of course," Richard said smoothly. "Though everything you need and everything one might want are different things, aren't they?" He smiled at Ryan, but there was an edge to it. "Madison's grown up with certain expectations, certain standards." The waiter arrived then. A young man who handed out leather-bound menus with prices that would make most people's eyes water. I noticed he served Richard and Patricia first, then Madison and Tyler, and finally Ryan and me, a subtle hierarchy based on perceived status. "The wine list, Mr. Garrett." The waiter handed Richard a tablet displaying bottles that started in the triple digits. "Excellent. We'll have the Dumilkins Chateau Margaux." Richard didn't even glance at the price. I knew it cost around $850 a bottle. "Very good, sir." As the waiter left, I noticed Patricia studying me over her menu. "Helen, please don't feel pressured to order anything too expensive. I know places like this can be overwhelming. The chicken dish is quite reasonable. I met her eyes calmly. That's thoughtful of you, Patricia, but I'll be fine. Tyler snorted softly, though he tried to cover it with a cough. Yeah, or just order a salad. I heard those are usually cheap. Tyler, Madison said sharply. What? I'm just trying to help. He grinned, clearly enjoying himself. No shame in being budget conscious. Ryan's jaw clenched. I put my hand on his arm under the table, a gentle signal. It's okay. Let them show themselves. Richard cleared his throat. So, Helen, Ryan mentioned you live in Greenwood? That's a nice neighborhood. Starter homes mostly. Good for people on a budget. It's a comfortable apartment, I said. An apartment. Patricia exchanged a glance with her husband. Well, apartments are certainly practical, especially for seniors. Less maintenance to worry about. Exactly, Richard agreed. No need for a big house when it's just you. The wine arrived. The sommelier made a show of presenting the bottle to Richard, who nodded with the casual entitlement of someone used to the best. We each received a glass except me. The sommelier had somehow determined I didn't need wine. I'll have a glass as well, thank you, I said quietly. He looked surprised, then quickly poured. I noticed Richard and Patricia exchange another look. That look said, She's ordering the expensive wine? Really? So, Helen, Richard continued after we'd all ordered our meals, Ryan tells us, you worked in property management? In a manner of speaking. Receptionist? Administrative assistant? I was involved in real estate, yes. Ah. He nodded knowingly. Showing apartments, that sort of thing? That must have been steady work. Not glamorous, but steady. I took a sip of my wine. It was excellent, full-bodied and complex, with notes of blackcurrant and cedar. Worth every penny of its price. It was educational, I'm sure. Patricia leaned forward. It must have been so hard, managing on that salary while raising a child. Children are expensive. All those school supplies, clothes they outgrow. We did fine. But still, she pressed, there must have been things you couldn't afford. Vacations, nice restaurants, cultural experiences. Ryan's face was reddening. Gran made sure I had. I'm not criticizing, sweetie, Patricia interrupted, reaching across to pat Ryan's hand. I'm just saying, there's no shame in having limited means. Some people have it, some people don't. That's just life. Our first course arrived. I'd ordered the seared scallops, $48. I saw Patricia's eyebrows rise slightly when the waiter placed it in front of me. Those look delicious, she said, though probably quite rich. Are you sure you can? She trailed off delicately. Can I what? Afford it, dear. She said it so kindly, so sympathetically. We're happy to cover your meal, of course. That goes without saying. But I'd hate for you to order beyond your means and then feel obligated. Tyler laughed outright. Dude, Mom, she already ordered it. I'm simply looking out for her, Patricia said primly. I cut into a scallop, perfectly caramelized on the outside, tender within. I took my time chewing, swallowing, savoring. Then I looked at Patricia directly. That's very considerate of you. But I can handle a meal. Of course, Richard jumped in, clearly wanting to move past the awkwardness. We're just glad you could join us. This is an important occasion, our families coming together. About that, Madison said, and I heard a nervousness in her voice that hadn't been there before. Ryan and I have been talking about the wedding plans. It's going to be beautiful, Patricia gushed. We've already spoken to the events coordinator at the Fairmont. June wedding, 300 guests, absolutely elegant. Ryan looked uncomfortable. That's a lot. We were thinking something smaller. Nonsense, Richard said. The Garrett family has a reputation to maintain. Our business partners will expect an invitation. Our social circle, we can't afford 300 people, Ryan said quietly. There was a brief silence. Then Tyler laughed. Dude, no offense, but we all know you can't afford it. That's why Dad's paying. We wouldn't dream of burdening you with the costs, Patricia said smoothly. We're happy to handle everything. Consider it our gift to the happy couple. That's very generous, I said carefully, but Ryan and I should contribute. Oh, Helen. Patricia's smile was so understanding it was almost insulting. We appreciate the thought, truly, but we understand your situation. There's no need for you to strain yourself. What matters is that you're there to celebrate. Exactly, Richard agreed. No one expects you to match our contribution. We're simply on different levels. Financially speaking, Madison was looking down at her plate. Ryan's knuckles were white where he gripped his fork. Different levels, I repeated softly. Nothing wrong with that, Richard continued, warming to his theme. Some people build wealth, some people manage to get by. Both are respectable in their own way. You did admirable work raising Ryan on limited means. No one's judging you for not having more to show for it. I set down my fork. And what should I have to show for it? Richard looked confused by the question. Well, I just mean property, investments, savings, the usual markers of success. But again, not everyone has the acumen for building wealth. It takes a certain kind of mind, strategic thinking, risk tolerance. Madison tells me Ryan's quite good at his job, which is wonderful. He clearly didn't inherit any financial limitations from. He stopped abruptly, realizing what he'd almost said. From you. The main courses arrived in that moment of suspended tension. Filet mignon, for Richard, $110. Chilean sea bass for Patricia, $95. Duck breast for Madison, $88. I'd ordered the Wagyu ribeye, $135. Tyler whistled low when he saw my plate. Damn, Grandma's going all out. Tyler, Madison hissed. What? That's like what, a week of her Social Security check? Patricia shot him a look that said, be quiet. But the damage was done. The truth of what they all thought was now hanging in the air like smoke. I cut into my steak. It was perfect seared crust, medium rare center, melting on the tongue, worth every cent. This is delicious, I said mildly. Richard, Patricia, you have excellent taste in restaurants. We come here often, Patricia said, still watching me with that mixture of pity and calculation. It's important to maintain certain standards. Standards, I echoed. That's an interesting word. Helen understands what we mean, Richard said. Don't you, Helen? This is the kind of place Madison's grown up with, the kind of lifestyle she's accustomed to. We need to make sure Ryan can provide that for her. Ryan's face was flushed. I make decent money. Decent, Richard interrupted. Isn't the same as what's required. Madison deserves the best, the kind of life she's always known. Vacations to street barts, a home in the right neighborhood, the right car, the right schools for their future children. These things aren't cheap. We've been discussing it, Patricia added gently, and we think perhaps a financial arrangement might be best. We can set up a trust for Madison, ensure she maintains her lifestyle regardless of Ryan's circumstances. A prenup, you mean, Ryan said flatly. It's standard in families like ours, Richard said. Surely you understand, Helen, from your years in property management, how important it is to protect assets. I took a sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch. They all watched me, waiting for my response. The poor grandmother, being told her grandson wasn't good enough, being reminded of her place. Actually, I said slowly, I do understand protecting assets. Quite well. Patricia smiled. I knew you'd be reasonable. You seem like a practical woman. I am practical. That's why I've always been careful about property, about investments, about building something sustainable. Richard nodded approvingly. Good advice. Though I imagine on your income, there wasn't much opportunity for investing. You'd be surprised what you can do with the right opportunities. Oh? He sounded amused, indulgent. Did you have a little nest egg stashed away? Every bit helps. Actually, I said, setting down my wineglass, I've done quite well with real estate. In fact, you might be familiar with some of my properties. Richard laughed. Your properties? Helen, I don't mean to be rude, but owning an apartment isn't quite the same as. I don't own the apartment I live in, I interrupted. I rent it. I've always believed in keeping my personal life separate from my business interests. Business interests? Tyler muttered, smirking. I turned to look at him directly. Yes, business interests. Like the Cascade Heights development you're managing, Richard. 42 luxury condos, right? Richard's smile faltered. How did you know about? I know because I own 40% of that property. Through Evergreen Holdings LLC. I let that sink in for a moment. I also own 35% of the Waterfront Towers project you launched last year. And I believe I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my portfolio app. I have a 22% stake in the Bellevue Commons Retail Center where your company leases its office space. The table had gone completely silent. Richard's face had gone pale. That's not possible. Oh, it's quite possible. I've been investing in Seattle real estate for 43 years. I started small, a duplex in 1982, bought for $47,000 with everything I'd saved. Renovated it myself, rented it out, saved every penny, bought another property in 1985, then another. Then I got smarter, started pooling resources with other investors, creating LLCs to minimize tax exposure and maintain privacy. Patricia was staring at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a different language. Evergreen Holdings? Richard repeated. You're saying you're EH? I am. But we've been doing business with EH for 15 years. Our quarterly reports. Go to my accountant and property manager, yes. I prefer to remain anonymous. It's simpler that way. People tend to treat you differently when they know you have money. I looked pointedly around the table. As you've all so clearly demonstrated tonight. Madison's mouth was open. Tyler had stopped smirking. Ryan was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. My portfolio currently generates about $85,000 per month in net income, I continued matter-of-factly. After property management fees, maintenance costs, and taxes, the properties themselves are valued at approximately $47 million, though the market's been volatile. $47 million, Patricia whispered. Give or take. I haven't had it formally appraised in 6 months. I took another bite of my steak. This really is excellent. Richard found his voice, though it came out strangled. But you, your apartment, your car, the way I what? Live modestly? Choose not to waste money on things I don't need? I met his eyes. Unlike some people, I don't require a Rolex to know what time it is. I don't need a designer dress to feel valuable. And I certainly don't need a pretentious restaurant to prove I belong somewhere. Gran, Ryan said softly. Why didn't you tell me? I turned to my grandson, saw the confusion and hurt in his eyes. Because I wanted you to grow up understanding that wealth doesn't define worth, that character matters more than bank accounts. That dignity isn't something you purchase, it's something you carry regardless of your circumstances. But I thought we were struggling. All those times I wanted things and you said no. We weren't struggling. We were learning to distinguish between want and need. Learning that happiness doesn't come from expensive things. I looked back at the Garretts. How to recognize people's true character by how they treat those they perceive as beneath them. The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant symphony of clinking glasses and murmured conversations, but at our table, time seemed to have stopped. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said quietly. You've all been perfectly clear about what you think of people you consider beneath you. The doorman who looked at me with doubt, the hostess who questioned if I belonged, your wife's assumption that I couldn't afford my own meal, your son's jokes about my social security, your comments about different levels and limited means and protecting Madison from Ryan's circumstances. We didn't mean, Patricia started. You meant every word. You just didn't expect to be held accountable for them. Madison finally spoke, her voice small. Mrs. Garrett, Helen, I'm so sorry. I didn't know they were going to. You knew enough, I said, not unkindly. You knew they looked down on Ryan's background. You knew they considered him beneath you financially. And you went along with it. You let them plan this dinner, this test, this evaluation of whether my grandson was worth your time. It wasn't like that, Madison protested weakly. Wasn't it? Then why are we here? Why the Emerald Room? Why the expensive wine? The 300-person wedding, the prenup conversation. This entire evening was designed to make Ryan and me feel small, to remind us of our place. Ryan stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. We're leaving. Ryan, please. Madison reached for his hand. He pulled away gently but firmly. I need some air. Gran, are you ready? I dabbed my mouth with my napkin and stood. Actually, there's one more thing. I pulled an envelope from my purse and placed it on the table in front of Richard. Inside, you'll find the contact information for my attorney. He'll be in touch about my stake in Cascade Heights. I've decided to sell my interest. I prefer not to be in business with people whose values don't align with mine. Richard's face went from pale to ashen. You can't, that's a $19 million stake if you sell the whole financing structure. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're a man who understands business, after all. Strategic thinking, risk tolerance. I quoted his own words back to him. Though I will say, it might be easier to find a new investor if you worked on your people skills. I turned to Madison, who had tears streaming down her face. You're a lovely young woman, Madison, but lovely isn't enough for my grandson. He deserves someone who loves him for who he is. Not despite where he comes from. Someone who would defend him, not sit quietly while her family tears him down. I do love him, Madison whispered. Then prove it. But not to me. To him. When you're ready to stand up to your family, when you're ready to build a life based on partnership instead of their money and expectations, you know where to find Ryan. I looped my arm through my grandson's and we walked out of that restaurant together. The same doorman who'd doubted me earlier scrambled to open the door. I nodded to him graciously. Outside, the rain had stopped. The Seattle streets gleamed under the streetlights, washed clean. Gran, Ryan said, his voice thick. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, sweetheart. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, I thought. You thought what? That we were poor? We were. Poor in the ways that matter. We were incredibly rich. We had each other. We had books and conversation and homemade meals. We had everything that mattered. But the money is just money, Ryan. It's a tool, not a trophy. I wanted you to understand that before you knew I had it. I squeezed his arm. And tonight proved why. Those people in there judged us based on nothing but perception. If you'd grown up knowing we had money, you might have become like them. Entitled, dismissive, cruel to those with less. We walked in silence for a block. Then Ryan said, I don't know if I can forgive her. Madison. She just sat there while they... That's your decision, honey. But I'll say this. People can grow. People can change. The question is whether she's willing to do the hard work. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mrs. Garrett, this is Madison. Could we talk, please? I showed it to Ryan. He stared at it for a long moment, then shook his head. Not tonight. I can't tonight. That's fair. We caught a cab back to my apartment. Inside, Ryan looked around with new eyes, seeing it differently now. Not as a sign of struggle, but as a choice. So what now? He asked. Now? We have some tea. Maybe watch that documentary about sea turtles you were telling me about. And tomorrow, if you want, we can talk about your future, about what you want to do next, about whether you want to stay at your job or try something new, about whether you want to keep living modestly or let yourself enjoy some of what you've earned. I've earned? Oh, Ryan, you think I was going to leave all that money to charity? I smiled. You're my grandson, my heir, my future. But I needed you to earn your character first. Money without character is just paper. Character without money is still character. So I was going to inherit it all along, eventually, when I thought you were ready. Though after tonight I studied him carefully. I think maybe you're closer than I realized. He sat down heavily on my worn couch. I'm still processing. 47 million, that's a responsibility, a tool, a burden and a blessing. I settled beside him. But you're ready for it, I think. Because you know what it's like to work for what you have. You know what it's like to be judged unfairly. You know what matters and what doesn't. And Madison? Only you can answer that. But ask yourself, when you think about spending your life with someone, what do you need? Someone who looks good at the Emerald Room, or someone who would defend you anywhere? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Madison. I told them to leave. I'm done with their money and their judgment. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I mean it. I choose Ryan. I showed him the message. He read it twice, then looked at me with those eyes that still held remnants of the 7-year-old boy who'd lost everything. What would you do, Gran? Me? I'd give her a chance to prove it. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but eventually. People show you who they are when they're comfortable, when they think there are no consequences. But they also show you who they can be when they're challenged. Tonight challenged her. Let's see what she does with that. He nodded slowly. Can I stay here tonight? I don't want to be alone. Of course. You never have to ask. We made tea. We watched the documentary. And when Ryan finally fell asleep on my couch, one arm thrown over his eyes the way he'd done since he was a child, I sat watching him and thought about the 43 years I'd spent building something I'd never needed to prove I had. I thought about my daughter, gone too soon, who'd never know the man her son became. I thought about all the times I'd said, we can't afford that, when the truth was, we don't need that. I thought about Richard Garrett's face when he realized the woman he'd pitied controlled a significant portion of his business. And I thought about how character, real character, isn't something you buy or inherit or manufacture. It's something you build, choice by choice, in how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. The next morning, before Ryan woke up, I emailed my attorney. I decided not to sell my stake in Cascade Heights after all. Instead, I'd attend the next shareholders meeting. In person. In my navy dress, from Nordstrom Rack. Some lessons needed reinforcing, and some people needed to learn that wealth whispers while poverty shouts, but character, true character, needs no voice at all. It simply is, unchanging and unshakable, regardless of the price tag on your dress or the balance in your bank account. That was the lesson I'd tried to teach Ryan his whole life. That was the lesson the Garretts learned in one expensive dinner. And that, I thought, watching my grandson sleep peacefully in the morning light, was worth more than all 47 million.